to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with Andy Lipson. Today we will have an in-depth discussion with our guest, self-described communist, is Greg, and his political journey, on his personal political journey, and what it means to be going through that journey as he finds your politics, on communism.
Yeah.
And under that lens, looking at general U.S. politics and organizing in the teachers' union as a high school teacher.
That's right.
Our Andy here is our very own Andy. They work together,
yes,
with Greg, and this is the reason for the connection.
Yep.
And we will have a lively discussion on two different topics. I think we're going to do two parts now. And right now we'll just focus on your personal politics, Greg. And then secondly, we'll talk about you both organizing together as teachers in your union. I think that's very important. Anyhow, so maybe you would like to introduce your own friend.
This is Greg, and I've actually wanted him on the show for quite some time. I think I've mentioned his name, Greg. Eduardo's always often saying, don't say that guy's name, he didn't give you permission, and I do it anyway. So this is the guy Greg, that I've been referring to.
Been doxing me.
Greg is he's a fellow teacher, a fellow union activist, and a fellow socialist, fellow communist. I've worked with him for 2 years, and I consider him a friend. Definitely consider him a comrade. This last year has been a really interesting year for us, I feel like, well, for me, and I believe for us together. And that's really what I want to get at, is I'm hoping this episode 1 is really in preparation for episode 2, which is two socialists, one union, one school, talking about the experience of trying to be revolutionaries in a unionized school. Talking about where we agree, disagree. I don't think it's a debate thing, but we've had a lot of experiences together, and I wanted us to share on what's left. But as I asked Eduardo to put together some questions, I noticed his questions, and I think rightly so, are really about your politics. He knows what I see as socialists, as what socialism is. We've had Bruce Neuberger, who's a Maoist, talk about what he means by socialism. Somebody else, I thought.
We had an anarcho-capitalist.
Yeah, we had an anarchist. But
I missed that episode.
Yeah, you missed, but
that was an interesting one.
Yeah, it was a friend of Eduardo's, anarcho-capitalist. I had it to go away. But I really think it's a good idea for Greg to have a chance to explain his politics. I'd like to hear it too, and use that as the starting point for talking about our work together next episode.
Great.
So I'm really glad you're here, Greg.
I'm excited to be here. I'm a fan of the pod. Team Eduardo usually, but sometimes you win the
He doesn't see. You don't take anything he says seriously. All right, so let's go ahead and.
Perfect. Let us begin then. So I thank you for introducing. I think what we'll do is we'll just have you introduce yourself, not like anything specifically to your work right now, but just in general your overall background on who you are as a person, where you're from, just briefly.
Wow. All right. I'm a San Francisco native. I was raised Catholic, and by a Mexican, an Italian mother, and a father who's Irish Catholic, and grew up in the city in the kind of west side by the Sunset, but my mother's from
this city.
San Francisco, the city. That's what we call it here. Okay. You're from the Midwest or whatever, so you don't know, but everybody around here knows it's the city. And I think our self-importance is part of our deal. But my mother's from this neighborhood, actually. She's from Mission, and she grew up on 17th of Valencia from the ages from 11 to 17, when she got out of orphanage and foster care. So she had quite the institutional view of San Francisco and the Bay Area. And then I started my career as a teacher at the same school where my mother taught. Mission High School, same room actually, room 411.
Well,
And 50 years later, started my career where she did, teaching the same subject, English. And I was just an honor to kind of, uphold her legacy in her room in her neighborhood, and just very special. And then, of course, this year I got moved to another room that I have no ties to, but I knew that would happen. So, yeah, it's just good to be here. I love the conversations you guys have and the kind of fearlessness with which you guys broach subjects, and I hope that I bring that same level of honesty to these important questions, because as the left grows, and I'm of a mind that it's growing, we really need to have an honest conversation and have multi-tendency discussions where people really say what they think, so that we can try to cobble together some kind of coalition of anti-capitalist revolutionaries who can win. Because I'm interested in winning. That's my bottom line.
and you said you teach English? Yeah? Okay. So I just wanted, because I know you teach physics, I'm just trying to see if both were colleagues of the same subject. Sorry, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
So when we, as Andy has mentioned, I was introduced, I've heard about you, but I've not, this is the first time we've actually met, and I'm curious, how would you self-describe your politics? Like, what do you consider yourself to be?
Well, I was raised in the Catholic Church, and my father's a theology teacher, and my mother's a daily mass goer, and I would consider myself a communist. And when I was 13, 14 years old, I was going through the confirmation process, and I thought that the goals espoused by the church were noble, and the figure of Jesus, and my father's Jesus, who was a very kind of, well, he was into liberation theology, so his Jesus was like very much a political revolutionary and a liberator. And I thought that those were all great things, but I said, they're so concerned with the next life, they don't want to win this one. And I saw the church and its institutions as impediments to struggle and impediments to human progress. And I started reading more about Marxism, socialism, and communism. And I picked the most extreme term that I could find that pissed off the most people, communism. And I haven't changed that label, but my ideas definitely have grown, and I would say I have not been a serious leftist, meaning that I engage in theory and read and act, and work in the struggle of trying to build socialism until 2012, 2011, during the Occupy Oakland movement. And that was a political awakening for me. So I would say I've been a communist in name for over 20 years, but indeed, I think only, for the last basically 10 or 8 years.
Well, then, how would you, I guess, then describe, or what does it mean to be you said it, the politics of communism. What would that look like?
Yeah, and how
politically,
because there's people call themselves socialists and communists, and when you use that term, does that have any specific meaning for you?
Yeah, I think that a communist is somebody whose ultimate goal is a gradual withering away of the state, of the organs of state, and the acknowledgement that that process is going to take generations, and it's going to involve a cultural revolution and a social revolution, and that it's going to be the ultimate goal, but that it needs to be built gradually, and there will need to be transitional stateness. And I think that's the main difference between a communist and an anarcho-communist or an anarchist. And a lot of socialists, I think, would agree with that trajectory. But I think that some socialists, like social democrats, or which maybe aren't socialists, or democratic socialists, would say, no, we can have a soft revolution. We can have some kind of revolution where we reform the state, or we have a state that lasts in perpetuity, where kind of goods are distributed to people who need them, and we have an uneasy kind of alliance between capital and worker. And I don't know. I think that if your goal is not ultimately a kind of stateless communism, then you're not a Marxist per se. I don't know. I think there's a good goal that's been articulated, and it's something to work towards. And so that's why I go with communist.
Mm-hmm. Did you get a chance to, just asking you quick, did you get a chance to look at Andy's Socialist video?
Yes, well, I listened to it when it came out.
All right.
Which was how long ago?
Last year.
Yeah, it was a long time.
Last year. I didn't review it for this.
No,
it was so perfect in my first kind of glance that I wanted it to stay in my mind that way.
Yeah, and I know you might have had a question about this, but can you say more? Would you consider yourself a Marxist?
Yeah, I think that word, a lot of people have a problem like using it, because would Marx consider himself a Marxist? Would Christ consider himself a Christian? I just think that Marx is the best political thinker that has existed.
And what can you say? What features of his ideas are most important to you?
Well, I think the materialist analysis is the most helpful thing, because there's a lot of utopianism and left utopianism kind of floating around. And what I appreciate about Marx is that it's a challenge for me to think the way that he does, scientifically, and Engels as well is super helpful. Actually, I have an easier time reading Engels, so I would say that yes, I think that I would say I am a Marxist insofar as I find Marx to be the best political writer, or the best writer of political economy out there, and one who views kind of theory as inherently political, and married his kind of political program to an analytical tool. And it's just so helpful for me. Encountering Marx in my first go-around at college at San Francisco State was transformative for me, even if I didn't really start to put these things in practice until later. Back 2004, my professor, Anthony D'Agostino at San Francisco State, introduced me to Marx and Engels and Lenin and Trotsky in a meaningful way, and Stalin, in a way that I found, and Mao. I mean, and a bunch of other thinkers as well. I mean, I read, he just curated such a good list of books and articles, and had us grappling with very important questions. And so, yeah, I would say Marxist is not my favorite term, but it's a good one to describe somebody who actually thinks that you can see a political program outlined in the works of Marx.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was curious. Where did you get your introduction to socialism, Marxism? In school, was it, or from? You mentioned someone from SF State. Did you get introduced to this? The theory, or it's not theory, it's more so a science,
Yeah,
you know?
but
the teachings of Marx, did you get exposed to it in school?
Yeah, so I was exposed to it just in my house, in my life. My brother was interested in leftism, and I listened to Rage Against the Machine. What are they on about?
Yeah.
I started exploring it on my own, but yes, the first kind of systematic kind of exploration of Marxism and radical literature was at State in these two classes on the Russian Revolution, really on the whole history of the Soviet Union from 1905 to from 1900 until its fall in the 90s. So yeah.
And the kind of tag team, I guess. But your parents were leftists, is that correct? Or like they consider themselves leftists? Is that true?
Yeah, I would say that.
And how did that influence you in any way?
Oh yeah. I mean, my dad was into liberation theology, and he considers himself a pacifist. And he's been arrested with some of our comrades, Darylin, at School of the Americas, protesting the kind of, empire, the American empire. And he took me to death penalty protests early on. But, we have a conversation about politics, and he doesn't believe that violence is ever justified in any sense. And I think that we're never going to win, and that no one ever would have won, and that you can't tell oppressed peoples not to pick up arms. In fact, you should arm them and support them and offer them solidarity when they do. And it's awful, and I totally agree with his analysis that violence is just this poison scourge that has all these kind of far-reaching effects, and yet every day is violence in the capitalist system, and the first shot has been fired by the system that we live in, and self-defense and community self-defense is not, in fact, new violence. It is self-defense and protection against a system that is destructive, and that there's no hope of building that kind of post-violence future without self-defense.
You have been like a consistent listener of our podcasts, right?
That's indeed, yeah, that's true.
Thank you. So the reason why I'm asking is because I'm sure you've listened to some of our reviews. How would you say, I don't consider myself to be a socialist, but Andy does. And I think maybe you're...
He considers you to be a socialist?
No,
I'm just kidding. Sorry, go ahead.
You'll get on the revolution train when you see it going.
When I see it, yeah, when I see the revolution.
I've heard you say that.
Yeah, everyone says that's my pickup.
Yeah, we're pushing right now. You're sitting there watching us push and run and throw our backs out. And you're like, I'm going to hop on this bad boy when you guys get going.
You might just need me at the end.
That's true.
Yeah,
that is
I mean, we're all Sisyphus unless enough people get on the rock.
If you think of chess, like, I let the pawns go first. No.
Wow.
I've also heard about your class heritage, too, that you come from a petit bourgeois background, and I'm really hearing that now.
Okay, we have to edit this.
We won't. That
has to stay in. Can my edits be
You
keep
can trump
that in?
guests can actually trump. Yeah, this guest can trump his edit.
I'm kidding. That was
You had a question about our episode or something.
You hear our episode, so you would align yourself more so with Andy than I think if we were to measure some spectrum here. And I'm curious how then you would defer your politics, differ from Andy's.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we have this discussion all the time. We're constantly in a dialogue about our differences and our similarities, and I think that he's taught me a lot. My politics are super elastic and constantly shifting, and I think that yours are. I think his are maybe a little less so because he's had a longer experience in left spaces. Yeah. But I think that I'm capable of influencing him, although it's hard. It's like chiseling at some kind of rock that is not meant to be a sculpture, so it's really jagged. But I'm complimenting your physique.
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
But so I would say that Andy is a little bit of a left communist. And I think for me, the space that I've come to in the last few years, especially thanks to a lot of discussions I've had with democratic socialists and Trotskyists about foreign policy, I would say that the tendency with which I'm most aligned right now is the Marxist-Leninist tendency, because I feel like they have the most robust critique of American empire and the most workable framework for opposing and dismantling U.S. empire, which I think and I think Andy would agree with this, which is the primary duty of American leftists now, is to find ways to disrupt and oppose U.S. militancy abroad, because there is no real hope of socialism and there's no real hope of our project taking off as long as this kind of hegemonic rule of the world continues from the United States empire, and a lot of anarchists and Trotskyists and democratic socialists, whether they're self-described or that's just where they gravitate towards, have a tendency to me to talk about, well, Kim Jong-un does this, Bashar al-Assad does that, and Maduro fails here and there, and Ortega does this. And I think that good faith internal critiques of socialist projects are great, But I think the first response has to be kind of the right of these nations to self-determination in the face of U.S. empire. And I think we would agree there. And where we differ is Andy is very intent on saying that state's not socialist, that project's not valid. I support them only because I oppose U.S. empire, where I think my view is more that building socialism in this world and throughout history is hard. Keeping the Soviet Union safe from reaction was very difficult. And there were decisions made that were awful. But if you look at the infrastructure of the Soviet Union in the period post-World War I, I think you'll find that the challenges that they faced were immense. And they made decisions that were not the decisions I would make with my hindsight now, but that were understandable in the context of their time. Just like Maduro has made decisions that I think are understandable. Bashar al-Assad, who I think Andy and I would agree is not a leftist, or even trying to attempt really a leftist project.
President of Syria.
The president of Syria, right. The lion of Syria. Right. I just feel like I'm an American and I was born here, and my goal is to oppose U.S. empire and not critique Daniel Ortega or Kim Jong-un. And also, I go beyond that and say it is kind of my job to defend them from American leftists who seem to leave space open that there could be an intervention that could be productive ultimately.
From us,
yeah.
An intervention from the United States of some sort.
Yeah. So materially, Andy and I agree on the tactic. When we have the discussion, I am too soft on these guys, on Stalin and Lenin.
Or somebody might call me a purist.
You're a purist or an ultra or a left com.
Right.
And that's where I came from, and that's probably where I'll go. But right now, I think that the way to defeat U.S. empire is to hold a harder line and to root for our enemies.
We agree on that.
Well, then I guess my question is then, how do you then see yourself in the U.S. politics here working? Do you, in the meantime, do you vote? Do you support candidates? Do you see yourself involved politically here, or are you as you said, he's very edged?
And one of the biggest differences between us is, like, you're a member of DSA, and I'm not. And we talk about, like, I'm not going to become one, and he has big criticisms of DSA, but he's a member of DSA.
But you're not. But if you're a member of the DSA, then DSA, Democratic Socialist of America, if you're a member of the DSA, then do you consider yourself to be a Democratic Socialist?
No. I consider myself to be a tactical member of DSA, a communist holding my nose and joining an organization that was founded by a socialist, Michael Harrington, who was an anti-communist, who was ideologically opposed to the Soviet Union and its attempts to, for better or for worse, build socialism and support socialist movements around the world, and figured that he could come up with a form of socialism along with his friends, his comrades, that would be palatable for Americans. And I think we're seeing a lot of his kind of work come to fruition with Bernie Sanders and Bernie Sanders' campaign. And I think you're seeing a lot of the DSA, the organization Harrington founded, take the kind of energy of the burgeoning left, the anti-Trump left, the first Sanders campaign, and kind of move that into the direction of a kind of social democratic desire to reform American capital. And I think where Andy and I differ on this one is that I will vote for Sanders again in the primary, and I will defend him online tactically because I know who my audience is, and I want people to break from the Democratic Party forever to work towards a workers' movements, and ultimately a workers' party that could be the ruling party of a revolutionary socialist state. So to disabuse people from the notion that you can vote your way to a kind of acceptable socialist state, my position is that you need to show them its limits. And I think that the way that Sanders was treated in 2016 shows us that the Democratic Party's worst nightmare is Sanders, and that advocating for Sanders and criticizing him when he's wrong, which I do all the time, because he's wrong a lot. I mean, he was better before he started running for president, because he would, be in the room with the Sandinistas when they were chanting "Death to America" without batting an eye. When you run for president, part of what happens is that you have to start rooting for America, and you have to start saying, how can we make this place a good place, a place built on genocide and slavery.
I guess then some socialists would then, and communists again, would then question supporting someone like Bernie Sanders and wonder why you would support someone like that and not someone who would consider themselves to be a socialist under the system and vote and be voted for, like Gloria La Riva.
I voted for her in 2016. I was proud to do that. My mother's name is Gloria, and so we went to the poll together because I'm still registered at her house, and she voted for Clinton, held her nose and voted for Clinton.
I guess I got confused because you said that you were in support of Bernie Sanders.
During the primary,
During the primary.
Tactical support for Sanders in the primary.
Yeah. And not for Gloria La Riva.
Well, she's not in the Democratic primary.
Right.
So
right.
she's a piece of, or she's not Piece of Freedom anymore. She's PSL now.
Yeah.
She's on the ballot as PSL.
Yeah.
And so, in the primary, tactically, I voted for Sanders because he was the leftmost Democratic candidate available and the only one who would speak of socialism in a positive light, and he's still the only one to do that. Warren says she's a proud capitalist. She won't use the term democratic socialism or even social democrat. She's a capitalist, and she's avowedly so. And I'm an English teacher. I believe in words, and I think just the fact that Bernie Sanders calls himself a socialist, even if he adds the unnecessary Democrat part to it.
Yeah, he does say democratic socialist.
Yeah, he doesn't want to scare Americans.
Would you not consider then that Bernie Sanders is a friendly capitalist?
It doesn't really matter to me. I think that what Sanders is the kind of last-ditch effort of the reformists, the kind of FDR wing of the Democratic Party. The last kind of, and he's an independent. He's not associated with the Democrats in a nominal sense, but he caucuses with them all the time because of the stranglehold of the two-party system. I think that he is that wing of the party, the populist left wing of the Democratic Party, their last gasp at some kind of reform before kind of socialism or barbarism, really, like before the kind of ultimate triumph of the vultures. And so I think that's what he represents, because the rest of the party has kind of gone farther down the neoliberal path of absolute fealty to the corporate to the corporate forces, and so that's how I see him. And I think friendly capitalist or kind of smiling face on kind of liberal capitalism. Yeah, I think that's an accurate way to say it. I don't think he personally is that, but I think that if you even want to get elected, and he's actually a feasible candidate. He's somebody who could get elected in a system that we all know is completely bankrupt. Then he is pretty much the leftmost you could be, which is not that great because we look at the political condition of America, and I don't believe that's the political condition of the American people. I think that those are the acceptable parameters set by our political system. He is to the left of that. And so I think it's fun to support him, and I think they're going to find a way to fuck him over, and like they did in 2016. And I think that it'll be crushing to DSA, and I think it'll be crushing to a lot of his supporters, and a lot of people close to me who are big supporters of him, and that could be a moment of great awakening for kind of potential socialists. But I think tactical support of Sanders now is a great way not to alienate people who could be future comrades. And critique of Sanders is a great way to make him a little better, or to get people who support him to think more critically about these kind of political questions. And it's something I've toyed with a lot. And
this is another area that we disagree on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Yeah, and I think deep down I kind of agree more with Andy's position on this. But I just remember 2016, and I don't want to sit on the sidelines and look like I'm not supporting the leftmost candidate to people who, when he gets fucked over and stabbed in the back by the bastards who his social democracy is too radical for them, I want to be able to offer alternatives in a friendly way, the friendly sheepdog.
I mean, Greg has never really, I mean, we've never really disagreed on our critiques of Sanders. Like, every time he's a disappointment, we both agree on the disappointments. Listening here, I would say part of it is almost like you see this is like the last gasp of the liberal wing of capitalism trying to hold on to something, and that the dam is about to break, right? That's almost how I hear it from you. Whereas I see this as the strengthening of that wing coming through Sanders, and that's why it can't be reinforced and built in any way. It has to be chipped and chipped away at. That's why it scares me, actually, the building of it.
Do you think it can be chipped away? Do you think it could be effectively, at this point before 2020, do you think that a movement to get people to exit Sanders and either not vote or to support a third-party candidate could be effective? Or
I don't think it can be, well, not whether it's effective or not. I just know something has to be built out, like something that calls itself socialist away from DSA.
Yes.
Must be constructed.
Yes.
And I think you think that can be constructed from within DSA, and I don't think it can be constructed from within DSA. It has to be both critiqued and identified from without, and then, like the people who will become disillusioned, it'll be out of that group that I think if we can build something truly independent, that's how it'll happen. These are some of the discussions.
Yeah, this is interesting for me as well because, for example, I align myself with the Zapatistas who don't really consider themselves socialists, like in the way that you consider yourself. But I would say that a lot of their politics align on that side of the spectrum. And what I'm hearing is that there are people that I have heard. I'm just interested in your perspective on this. That some of my friends in Mexico, they voted for AMLO, who was somewhat, I guess, people want to compare like Bernie Sanders in Mexico. But there are people outside in other parts of Mexico who said, we're not even going to trust the system. We're going to create our own commune, work by ourselves until we can try to gain, ¿cómo se dice? Traction for a larger revolution. So they have their own doctors, their own schools, their own working groups outside of the system in place currently, the Zapatista movement. So I guess that is what you're saying, to work outside of the current system. And Greg, you're saying to work within the system and hopefully chip away and tell me what I don't want to put words into your mouth. I think you should tell me. Is that what you're saying? Working with?
I think the work outside the system is more important. I think it is to build socialist spaces. No, if you want to, you can. I don't think that I'm tepidly supporting Bernie Sanders because I think it's an interesting experiment in advancing leftist ideas in liberal spaces and calling the bluff of the Democratic Party that still kind of holds sway over a lot of people. And I feel like I can't abdicate that space, but most of the work I'm doing is in spaces that are overtly anti-capitalist, anti-democratic party, around immigrant rights issues, around labor organizing, around communism and building communism. And so I would say it's maybe the least important work that I do. But I like to just monitor it. I think that the best stuff I've read about this is from Lenin, about the kind of tactical engagement in the political process, and the kind of engagement, and then the revocation of that engagement, and then engaging again when it serves your purpose. And that is what the Bolsheviks did, and not that the current left is anywhere near as disciplined or built up as the Bolsheviks, but they continue to do that. And I think part of it is you could be right, and I think Andy's right with his analysis of the fruitlessness of the Sanders project. But it looks shitty, I think, to stand on the sidelines and say, F you, when you don't have, the Bolsheviks didn't have the numbers to do that. They didn't have the power to do that. They were probably down at 5% at that point. When, I think this is early 17 when the first revolution happened. They were about 5% of the Duma.
You're talking about the February Revolution.
February Revolution.
Yeah. 1917, when the Tsar is first taken down, and the provisional government is established.
The provisional government was established, and they just let the provisional government hang itself and waited. And when it was clear that provisional government was going to be dominated by reaction, the Bolsheviks were ready and had massive support because they had been holding a kind of the all power to the Soviets line with this kind of parallel structure that had been set up. And that's not all he wrote about, because this has been a long, from 1905 to 1917, it was a long process of the kind of organization that became the Bolsheviks, doing this, this kind of, hokey pokey with participating in electoral politics. And I think it actually, a lot of the stuff around the Russian Revolution is not a great parallel to the current, but I think that that tactical participation is an intriguing model for me. And so it helped solidify where I'm thinking now. And I brought this kind of stuff to Andy, and he understands what I'm saying and doesn't agree, but he gets my position. And I get his position because, like, instinctually, he's right, because it infects everything when you participate in a system as fucked up as the American system. And we brought up AMLO earlier.
Andrés Manuel López Obrador.
The new president of Mexico, who is basically, I would say, is doing something similar to Lula. When Lula was elected, Lula, the former president of
was now incarcerated in Brazil.
Incarcerated as part of a fascist judicial coup in Brazil, where basically they forwarded this project of punishing bribery, punishing corruption, and the car wash initiative or something, I forget what it was called.
Yeah.
And so there was
money laundering. Yeah.
Moro was this big judge, and he would, I'm gonna prosecute some leftists, prosecute some right wingers, and then eventually it was leftists under the Rousseff government, who was the former guerrilla who became Lula's successor. And anyway, so now Lula's in jail.
She was tortured as a socialist.
She was tortured, and when her impeachment was voted for, when the coup finally kicked off, Bolsonaro invoked the name of her torturer in his vote, in the name of whoever the comandante was who tortured her. I mean, he's a real piece of shit, and when he got stabbed, it was it was just only a shame that it didn't finish the job. But anyway, please leave that in.
That's going to be yours.
Again, separation. Don't come for me.
You think Bolsonaro should? Well, yeah, okay, I get it. I get it. Okay, so but my point about Lula was Lula lost time and time again, and finally, I think the fourth or fifth time he ran, he started to say, the capitalists and the socialists can get together and we can build something and take care of people's needs. Well, we maintain a kind of maintain a place for enterprise and a free market, and he got elected. And I feel like, because I followed the first time that AMLO got so close to the presidency and then was kept out under suspicious circumstances.
Yeah,
that's not the same AMLO who ran this time. This AMLO is less ideological, and seems to me like he has done a Lula-type move towards the center. But the Zapatistas were boycotting that election too. And I'm intrigued by the Zapatistas and by their positions. But I want everybody to remember that one pillar of Zapatista thought did come from the Jesuits. So I have an inherent distrust for them, because they have that liberation theology pillar of their program, or they did in the beginning. Right?
I don't think they have it now, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it was the indigenous culture, the Jesuit liberation theology, Marxist Leninism, was the third pillar.
Comandante Subcomandante Marcos came in and he didn't have that Jesuit background. It was a different, there's also suspicion because he doesn't even consider himself to be one of the main leaders. But he came in with...
He stepped back recently, right?
Yes,
okay.
he did. He has now since retired somewhat. People are saying he didn't want to be controlling the narrative. People were focusing on him, which is good for him. But, I had a different question. I think he was asking about Zapatistas, and I just lost my train of thought.
You brought it up. I'm always intrigued by Zapatistas.
Yeah, but I don't think they're standing with the Jesuits currently here.
No, but it was one of their... The liberation theology was one of their...
Right. You were saying.
Formative things. And me too. I mean, I came out of that too. And Zapata himself was a big influence on me.
Okay.
16 gigs.
So you mentioned people like Stalin, like Trotsky, and like Lenin. Maybe I'll ask you to start with Lenin. What about him is important in you being a revolutionary and your idea about thoughts about being a revolutionary and revolutionary theory? What do you think is important about his contribution?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Lenin was kind of a conservative revolutionist where he was very kind of programmatic in his thinking and cautious and real tactician, which doesn't come naturally to me. That's not the way I think. And so it's a good challenge to read him. And in a different way than Marx, because I think Lenin's writing is really clear for me and easy for me to comprehend. I just don't disagree. I don't agree with it as much. And so, yeah, it was really good reading him and reading State and Revolution. I read it with a group, which was interesting. But the first thing of his that I read was on my own, which What Is to Be Done, the pamphlet from like 1902, 1903. And this was a period where the left in Russia was in disarray, and Lenin, much like Andy, was wild-haired. He had hair back then. He was railing against the state of the left and criticizing his enemies and
The reformists.
The reformists, yeah, the collaborationists, the opportunists, and so it was good to read that. It was galvanizing, and Lenin's brother died much earlier than 1905 revolution.
Mm-hmm.
He died before he wrote What Is to Be Done. And that death was probably super influential on his politics, crystallizing his politics as a Marxist, as a revolutionary Marxist, and away from the anarchist tendency. So reading him, his like looking at his evolution from 1905 to 1917 was interesting, and State and Revolution, kind of like the blueprint for the revolutionary movement in Russia, was, I think it's one of the most important things ever written about communism. And then we get to see his conservatism kind of assert itself, and we see Lenin as a ruler kind of deviate from his democratic ideals, his egalitarian ideals, and towards a kind of conservatism, trying to hold on to a revolution that was, fought, through guile and cunning more than might, and so I think that he's just a fascinating figure and a good person for me to challenge myself with, and a good person for leftists to challenge themselves with. He actually did it. He did the damn thing, which is pretty impressive. He had a lot of help from a lot of comrades who don't get as much recognition as Lenin, but he wrote about it the best. And just in recent years, reviewing his work and looking at his legacy has been really informative for me as a communist.
Mm-hmm. Okay, can I have another question then?
Yeah, go ahead.
What about Trotsky and Stalin? Would you say is important for people to know about, or because those are big figures in our tradition?
Yeah.
And I actually feel like you refer sometimes maybe more favorably to Stalin than I do. I think. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is there anything you think is important about their contribution, in the positive or in the negative, that's meaningful for you?
Yeah. Well, so when I was like flirting with communism as a kid, I wrote a big research paper, my first research paper, summer before sophomore year, on Stalin, because I was like, how can I be a communist if this guy is tarnishing our legacy? So I looked into him and I read about him, and I read a variety of sources with my little 13-year-old brain, 14, I don't know, and I tried to piece together a picture of this guy and what his goals were, and kind of through my life I've continued doing that. And I think as Americans, as communists, it's our job to shine a light on what he actually did, what America was doing, and if there's an internal leftist discussion about Stalin and his role, say for example the Spanish Civil War, that's one thing. But he is also a leftist thinker, a revolutionary, who wrote stuff that we can read on the question of nationalism, as a Georgian in a largely Russian movement, and also on Marxism-Leninism, kind of making Leninism a thing. And I just think it's worth engaging with, and I don't believe in these kind of leftist figures that are not worth examining, except for maybe Pol Pot or Abimael Guzman from Shining Path. No, I mean, Shining Path is such a cool name. Sendero Luminoso, that's a cool name.
The revolutionaries from
Peru.
Right?
Yeah. We could. Anyway, so I think they all need engagement with and understanding, and especially as an American, just to trot out the CAA fact book on Stalin is false. Let's engage with Trotsky's critiques of Stalin and Stalin's critiques of Trotsky, and the anarchist critique of both of them, and let's read this shit and get to the bottom of it. But out of those three, right now,
Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin.
I would say you can get a lot of information and a lot of knowledge from looking at them without picking a side right now in 2019.
Interesting.
Just looking at the U.S. politics in general, what do you think we should do possibly outside of voting? Like as something that could be really practical for communists, socialists.
And add on to that, since ours is what's left, could you say something about what you think the state of the left is? Is that friendly?
I think you can, if you want to mix that cocktail.
Yeah. Molotov. I think unionizing is a good thing to do. I think that I got to work tangentially on the campaign to unionize Anchor Steam, the oldest craft brewery in the United States, and they recently affiliated with the Longshoremen's Union, ILWU, and it was really inspiring to be involved in that process and to watch it unfold and to see the new worker power in a warehouse that was being crushed by a multinational company, Sapporo, that was kind of trying to keep them from doing it. And they still haven't won their contract yet, but they're in talks. And it just changes the workers. A unionized worker who's won a labor fight is just an emboldened and politically activated person. You got people in that house reading Lenin now and talking to their friends about organizing. And that's something you could do, is support those efforts. There are other efforts that I'm supporting right now that I cannot talk about, because if you talk about organizing efforts in an early stage, it can be very difficult. If management find out about it, they can crush nascent union movement, organizing movement early. And so we have to have kind of, we have to be cautious. But I think that's one of the most important things you can do. And I think a lot of leftists would disagree because I think they see a lot of these unions as liberal in the pejorative sense, meaning that they work with capital and there's no political potential in there. And I think for the ILWU, that's wrong. I would say for unions like ours, there may be more truth to that.
United Educators of San Francisco.
So the second most important thing that someone could do, I think, is to work to push their union left. And that starts in your building, I think, and that's what Andy taught me. That's something I've learned from Andy, the importance of organizing within your building and in your space, and trying to identify other leftists and trying to find causes that can increase the well-being of your colleagues, and build worker power within your building, and try to transfer that to your union, your larger union body. So those are two things that you could do. Third thing, go shut down an airport. I mean, when they announced that the Muslim ban was a thing, and people ran to SFO and blocked it. It was very meaningful, powerful. When
We might have been there, you and I.
yeah, I was on the crutches.
Oh,
And I broke my big toe, but I was out there. It was great. It was just amazing, the power of the people. Yeah, I think I saw you out there, not on crutches. Lucky. And
I have footage of it. It was really, I was interviewing people. Yeah.
That's awesome. Let's do it again. So when they announced the raids recently in the Bay Area, some organizers ran down to Palantir, and I joined them. Palantir is a surveillance company that enables these ICE raids, these raids targeting undocumented people, and just stoking fear and using the surveillance state to punish people who are convenient political scapegoats for fascist movements like Trump's. And that's another kind of thing, the immediate responsiveness. So organizing in place and then supporting good immediate triage movement that's going to maybe help protect people and help protect lives. Those are all good things. And if you want to do jujitsu or learn weapons training or find some way to improve yourself or to prepare for climate collapse and massive resource shortages or crises like that, that might be good too. I'm not doing those things, but I want to. It's just
Time.
Yeah, time.
I think the other thing that you've been this relates to that second part you brought up about organizing at our site.
I was just going to mention that,
But you've been a pretty consistent, not just supporter, but advocate, agitator for strike. Whether it be support of the LA and Oakland strike and getting workers from our site and from our school to participate in whatever way possible, but also openly saying we need to strike.
Yes.
I think that's an important thing that you've been doing, and that's a line we both share as we talk to our colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is, I think, what we will do next time. Where we're going, I would like to really. I've seen you both work together. Well, I've seen you, but you both have told me about now. You, Andy, really got to I'm messing up the wording.
Yeah.
But your work together in your own union, I think, really is an example of what you can do outside of voting. I think both of you really try to bring your union to have some transformation within the education, at least within your work site. So I'm interested and curious about that more.
Other thing is, can you say something about what you think the state of the left is, either in the United States or internationally?
I think I'm a little more optimistic than you are, perhaps. I joined DSA because they showed up. This organizer showed up at a protest that we had, a really ineffectual UASF protest, United Educator San Francisco, outside of the school board. And this organizer showed up and he said, yeah, why don't you guys strike? And I said, why don't we strike? And he said, hi, I'm Evan. I'm from DSA. This is the guy who would go on to really be instrumental in organizing Anchor's team. You should come to our labor meeting and talk about why you guys aren't striking. And I was like, okay. And he said, but you do have to join DSA if you want to get more involved. And I said, okay. I had joined 2016 after the Sanders candidacy because I thought it would be a good way to meet left-leaning Sanders supporters and kind of push them. And then I went to like a meeting. I was like, oh, God, they did some singing thing. And I was like, oh, terrible. And so I let it lapse. But then I rejoined and I got to meet Evan and a bunch of other people like my friend Brace and Hannah and just really good organizers. And it most of them are communists or revolutionary Marxists, and they're like, yeah, DSA is just where the political energy is. And I don't think that's true of every chapter. I think like Philadelphia, East Bay, and even within San Francisco, there's a lot of liberals, anarchists, people who I feel like don't have the most concrete or effective politics and aren't that influenceable. But there's a lot of momentum and a group of good organizers who may be few but tireless can be very effective. I just think you got to watch out for burnout, BERN, and keep your goal on revolutionary Marxism. And that's why I joined Red Star, which is a revolutionary Marxist caucus within DSA that kind of is friendly with other revolutionary groups. And I think if not for Red Star, I think I would have left DSA.
Do they have an affiliation with Bernie-crats as well?
DSA?
Uh-huh. Do they work together?
There are Bernie-crats in DSA.
I see.
Yeah.
All right.
Which is a terrible name, but I know some Bernie-crat people, and I've met them, and some of them leave Bernie-crats and become socialists, which is, I think, a trajectory you're not super optimistic about, but I've seen it happen, and I have, and it can happen, and I just hang around left spaces trying to guilt people to being revolutionary.
Yes. That's, all right, good. Well, I have. Would you have any other questions? I can't think of any. I think you've answered most of my questions.
Maybe the last two would be this. You're not a democratic socialist, but I do think we probably both believe that democracy has a role in socialist revolution. I believe that. What about you?
Yeah, definitely. I think if you're alienating people or talking over them or silencing them when they're trying to participate in good faith, that's key. Because there's tons of wreckers out there, liberals, people who are obstructing, probably FBI people. Fuck them. You don't need them. What you need is to bring in the good faith people who are actively trying to build something and educate those who could be educated and who aren't professional class traders who are going to destroy what you're trying to build. And I think it's inherent in socialism. I think that's what we're doing. It's horizontalist and it's enfranchising to everyone. And I think spelling out democracy is kind of a losing gambit because it's implying that there's authoritarian socialism, something to be feared. I think that is liberalism right there. And I think that and Stalin said this, and I have never found where this is from, but it's constantly attributed to him. What good is freedom to a starving man, right? If your material needs are not met, then your freedom of speech or expression is worthless if you're dead. And so I think that's a good thing to remember. I'm not saying that we should trade our personal expression. I'm a very outgoing and wild person, and if I had a Stalinist telling me to wear a gray suit and do something, I wouldn't appreciate it. But I think there's a lot of truth to the fact that liberal freedoms and self-expression, and even anarchist freedoms and self-expression, are ephemeral if they have no way of working towards getting power and obtaining power for the working class and building a movement where people's needs are met, especially in a time of climate crisis, of resource crisis, as the kind of growth model of economics is eviscerated for all to see as a lie because of the repercussions of it. I mean, even if you're a climate skeptic, you know that there's a certain amount of copper in the world, there's a certain amount of mica, like there's all these resources that are finite, and there will be a crisis when the limits are reached and we have animals dying off en masse. And so basically the thing is we need a democratically controlled economy that has to be some level of centralism worldwide to drive down carbon emissions and to make sure that our resources are distributed in a way where no mass extinctions, where people's needs are met. Because if you talk to a lot of capitalists and you really get them drunk and you push them, they're Malthusians, which means Robert Malthus was the guy who said there will be mass extinctions, and that's going to be part of the future. And
it's built in. We shouldn't try to avoid it. It's part of the way we should understand how the system runs.
And if you push these Silicon Valley people, you'll get there. And I worked at a Silicon Valley company for a couple of years as a peon, and it's true. They are inherently classist and racist and tech supremacist, and that's not acceptable. People in Bangladesh have just as much right to live as people in the United States, and so when there are climate refugees or water refugees who need potable water to drink and to clean themselves, we need to have an organization that's going to fight for them and recognize their basic humanity rather than in-groups versus out-groups. And I think only socialism offers that. Only internationalist socialism offers that vision for the future. And so that's why I'm a communist today.
Last thing I would ask is there anything about being revolutionary or about revolution that you want to share that we haven't either asked you about, or, that you just want to say that is about your beliefs or anything like that?
Yeah, I wear the hammer and sickle proudly because I think it's important to recognize the project of the Soviet Union and recognize that the symbol predates the Soviet Union, and it represents the union of agricultural and urban workers, industrial and agricultural workers. And I think that words like communist and like the hammer and sickle need to be reclaimed. And if you meet a recalcitrant expat who gets all up in arms about it, have a discussion. And, people try to claim PTSD from, their family's farm in Cuba being repossessed by the government. What they don't mention is that they had indentured servants on the farm or something like that. So let's talk about this stuff and let's investigate history. Let's seize history back from the victors, from the CIA, because I think the fall of the Soviet Union is a world tragedy, and the next communist kind of organization we build is going to be better because of the past organizations that came and went, and their mistakes that we can learn from, not that we should pretend never happened.
Right, I agree with that.
That's it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes, yeah, and so for this episode, folks, if you have, we really do hope if you have comments or questions, these questions actually will be going to you, so you can respond to them, whether it be, I think really YouTube and Bitchute are the only places that allow that.
No cops.
Right.
Don't care.
So if you have some thoughts you want to share or questions you have for Greg, ask them that for this episode. This is part 1, because part 2 will be us talking about our actual work together in the union at Mission High School, the nuts and bolts.
I'm very curious.
The best work, the most important work.
That is, I agree with you.
Yeah.
But I do think these ideas inform it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So
I became a teacher because I'm a socialist. It's not the opposite way around. This is part of my project. I love kids and I love English, but bottom line, I became a teacher because I wanted to join this union that my mother was a member of that hasn't done shit. It hasn't struck since 1979. I want us to strike, and I want public education to be one of the flashpoints where we say we value human life and human integrity over profit. And it's a good place to do that, but it's not the only place to do that. You can do that at Mickey D's, and you should.
Yep. I can't think any better way to say it than that.
Well, thank you, Greg.
All right, fellas.
Greg, thanks, man.
Thank you. This concludes our episode. Thank you for viewing or watching. You can find us on any of our 5 platforms on social media, which is Bitchute, Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes Podcast, and YouTube. Yes, please rate, review, subscribe, and please, best of all, share with your community. Thank you.
And we'll see you next week.
Until next time.
Likely with him. If not next week, then in 2 weeks.
Okay.
I'm Eduardo Barca with Andy Lipson. Hasta luego. Ciao.
And I already let Greg know about the editing.
Yes, you
And
can
you can
edit
say whatever you want.
anything you want.
Right.
So even now as we're talking, you can just stick out your tongue.
And if you feel like you have to start over, just take a pause
Yes, so that,
so I can do that edit for that.
okay. So, all right.
Oh, and we've even stopped to look shut up for the right names,
Yeah, so if you don't remember a particular
And you're like,
person-
I want that detail. Let's stop and do that and give me that detail.
But I just saw your edit and I'm not Democratic Socialist. That's Andy's fault. He gave me that. So.
You're a troll.
It's true. He is in the DSA. But that's how you know him. That's how.
Well, that's why I'm just going to say socialist, all right?
Right.
Is that all right?
Sure.
Is that all right?
Good.
Or
Just,
what
yeah,
would
that's
you
fine.
self-describe? How would
I'm
you
a communist.
Communist.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. There. I need something where we can have a topic for. All right. Here we go. Funny years for both now. Kids.
And the camera is right there.
Yeah. All right. So let's take a breather. Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion. Well, discussion.
What a mess.
Welcome. Here we go.
Yeah.